Midtown hum never stops, even in midwinter. Steam rises from the grates like slow applause. Some stories in this city don't start with a bang, they start with a reservation. And this Met begins on East 46th Street, where the air tastes like rain on brass and something colder underneath. Adjust your volume and get ready for the story, How Paul Castellano's Days Ended. The city is a coat that never quite fits. You pull it closer and the wind slips in anyway, a thin line down the spine. Midtown in December near East 46th Street feels exact about this, with Sparks Steakhouse throwing warm light onto the curb. I start the evening with a small habit. I count what does not want to be counted. Steps between the curb and the brass-handled door. Seconds the crosswalk grants before the red hand holds steady. How many coats on the rack by the hostess stand? Counting does not change anything, but it keeps the mind from drifting. A driver in a long wool coat sits low behind the wheel of a dark sedan and watches the lane by Sparks Steakhouse. He knows curbs the way a tailor knows seams. If the spot is clear when he needs it, the night moves like a smooth zipper. If it is not, the night puckers. Across the street a pair of men stand with hands in pockets. They talk like old friends who do not need words. Every so often one laughs at nothing, not loud, just enough to send small puffs of breath into the cold. They prefer the sidewalk to the dining room. Some people think better under chandeliers, some under streetlights. Inside the front windows waiters polish silver and lean over linen. A busboy warms his hands near a register, looks toward the door as if the night might ask a question, then returns to plates, patient as gravity. A woman in a camel coat passes with a gift bag that makes a soft paper sound. She glances at the warm glow in the glass and keeps walking. Ripple. Even in winter, New York is a river. You stand on the bank, and the faces flow past. I count the taxis that slow and then think better of it. 1, 2, and a third with the light off as the driver taps the wheel to a station only he can hear. A fourth noses in too close and is waved away by the doorman, whose gesture is a gentle refusal and a small blessing at the same time. Across the avenue the office towers near Grand Central empty. Elevator banks release people in soft bursts. Coats button. Scarves adjust. Phones are checked. Everyone goes somewhere that is not here. That is one way of saying, here will soon belong to whoever needs it most. There is a chalk scuff on the curb near the hydrant. A small white arc where a tire touched and a boot toe smudged. I treat it like a notch in a book spine. If I look back later, I will know I stood here this night. The two sidewalk men trade places without speaking. One steps to the corner and checks the sight line down the block, noting a bus shelter glow that throws a rectangle of light across wet pavement and a shallow puddard under the taxi stand sign. He notes me as well. We share the calm understanding of people who are not looking for trouble but would like the schedule to behave. Inside, a waiter tests a small lamp at the service station. On, off, on, then sets two steak knives as if they were compasses pointing north. The hostess draws a careful line through a name. Another party calls in to say they are running late. In this city lateness is a dialect. A light snow starts without ceremony. Flakes appear in the cone of a street lamp and vanish or contact with asphalt. People tilt their faces up anyway, as if the sky just remembered their names. The driver steps out and inspects the curb again. He is not impatient. He is exact. He wants the nose of the car square with the door when the time comes. He wants no door ding, no wheel scrape, no angle that makes a passenger hesitate. Hesitation is a pebble in a gear. Pebbles break machines. A couple decides to take a photo under the marquee. They inch toward the street to fit the sign, and the doorman eases them forward with the same gentle wave. Their breath blooms and fades as they laugh at something private, the sound rising and then dissolving into the traffic hum. At the corner, a newsstand radio murmurs scores. The vendor keeps one glove off to count change and hands a regular, an extra bag, the city method of apologizing for weather nobody controls. Time leaves fingerprints. By 7, the white-collar crowd has thinned. By 7:15, the first dinner wave arrives. By 7:20, the lane pattern shifts. Taxis stop where they used to slide through. Private cars hesitate where they used to commit. The street runs on tide tables, learned by feel. I follow the two sidewalk men with the corner of my eye. One touches his watch, the way people do when nights matter. The other edges close to the doorway glow, then back into the cold. I think of moths and lamps and keep it to myself. A cab pulls up. A man steps out and waves the driver on. He stands by the window, reading the room with his shoulders, deciding whether to enter or to place a call. He makes the call. Whatever he hears sets a small crease at the corner of his mouth. He blends into foot traffic, collar up, hat low. Inside, a waiter carries a tray with the care of a man guarding a new memory. He glides past a table of office friends raising a glass to the kind of news that belongs to December. Promotions, engagements, one more year survived. The toast finishes and the room settles into the gentle percussion of forks and low talk. I keep counting, not because numbers can solve a night, but because they keep a person honest. 14 steps from the corner to the brass rail, 7 seconds for the late start on the walk signal, 2 beats between the driver glancing left and glancing right. Small metronomes make a rhythm a person can follow. A thin fog drifts from a delivery truck on the cross street, curling low and making headlights look kinder. The men on the sidewalk soften at the edges and then reappear. The doorman clears his throat, not from need, but because every stage has cues. I tell myself I am only a witness to winter, that none of this is my concern. Then the driver adjusts the sedan by the width of a hand, and the adjustment feels like a sentence find its verb. The street answers by going quiet in the way sound engineers call natural room tone. If you were not listening for it, you would miss it. Some nights the city speaks in headlines, other nights it speaks in small corrections, a car aligned, a coat buttoned, a glance held a moment longer than manners require. Tonight is a small correction night. You can feel the future tighten the way a knot draws in when someone pulls both loose ends. I look down the block where traffic lights stack red over yellow over green like little theatre curtains. Beyond them, other corners make their own corrections, a wrong lane chosen, a store closing early, a bus running ahead of schedule. All of it will meet here, in front of warm windows and a brass-handled door. I do not know the whole month yet. I know only this air, this sidewalk, this steady tick of decisions. The men who prefer sidewalks stand as if a page is about to turn. The driver rests his hand on the gear and lets the engine settle into a calm breath. I count one more thing, my own pulse slowing to match the city. There is a reason the old stories start with weather. Weather makes strangers into a crowd. Tonight the cold is the host. It seats us where it wants. It pours a glass of patience. It asks us to wait for the next small correction. And we do. We wait. The month does not start on the first day. It starts in the margins, where people jot small notes and promise to remember. Later, those notes look like footprints leading to a door no one meant to open. December in 1985 carries a second kind of weather in Midtown. On the first Monday, a meeting moved from afternoon to evening. No one argued. Streets were slick, the city wore its half-holiday grin, and the change felt harmless. A man at a back table said early dinners suit winter. Another said evenings make rooms softer. Both true, neither about dinner. A phone tree misbehaved 2 days later. Calls rolled to numbers that never take calls at that hour. Voicemails stacked like snow against a basement door that sticks even in summer. Small apologies went out, all of them polite, none of them useful. If you listened carefully, the apologies were not about the calls. They were about time getting impatient. By the first Friday, the street felt different. Not louder, just more certain of itself, as if the blocks had been ironed. Cabs found curbs with less fuss. Valets moved like chess pieces played by someone who knows how a pawn becomes something else. The people who prefer sidewalks began to meet in pairs, near awnings with good sightlines. They did not loiter. They rehearsed stillness. The next week was for errands that do not look like errands. A tailor visit becomes a reason to measure a hallway. A coffee becomes a chance to time a walk light. A delivery becomes an excuse to find out which door sticks and which door never sticks. I wrote notes or a simple card. Wind from the east. 2 cones by the hydrant. Steam from the deli vent after 6. None of it dramatic, all of it reliable. The calendar turned toward the middle, and people grew sentimental in the way this city allows. The baker near 3rd placed a small tree in his window and hung 2 strings of lights that refused to blink in sync. An older couple posed for a photo on the corner before a dinner upstairs somewhere. A doorman borrowed a stepladder to fix a bulb and kept the ladder afterward, which is how you know he expected more fixing. Inside rooms, conversations did not finish. A story would get to the good part and pause. Someone would suggest they talk again on Thursday. Thursday would become the following week. The spaces between words began to carry the meaning, not the words. It was like listening to a band where the drummer is the quietest player and still sets the whole room. I visited a friend whose office overlooks the avenue. He keeps plants that should not survive in winter, and yet they do. He asked me about the sidewalk below, not because he needed news, but because he wanted to hear how an outside mind names what it sees. I spoke of lanes, buses, and a particular delivery truck that idles too long. He nodded as if I had recited a weather report that confirmed a forecast he had written himself. On a grey Wednesday the driver practiced. He made a slow loop around the block 3 times. On the first loop he paused too close to the crosswalk. On the second he left too much room behind the hydrant. On the third he set the sedan square to the brass-handled door and then exhaled. You would have thought a musician finally tuned a stubborn string. The restaurant staff noticed only what affected service. A runner asked whether the cones at the curb would be moved by the weekend. A hostess joked that winter teaches patience, and tips teach speed. In the kitchen the broiler men worked like a low thunder that never quite becomes a storm. No one lingered by the window, and still every person in that room could draw the view from memory. I watched the people who'd watch people. One favoured the mailbox across the street. He leaned in as if reading a notice, which let him read the reflections in the glass. One preferred the newsstand with the radio. He always bought gum and never opened it. Another favoured motion. He crossed and recrossed the avenue with the grace of someone who studies traffic, the way other people study music. When we speak of tension, we picture tightrope and drum skin. In truth, tension in a city is paperwork, reservations that change by small degrees, delivery slips with initials that do not belong to anyone on staff, a maintenance ticket for a light that works fine. Someone calls a security firm about a camera that does not exist and asks its price anyway. It is the kind of paperwork that leaves the city looking normal and feeling arranged. One evening, I stepped into the lobby to warm my hands. and heard a waiter tell a new hire the rules that matter. Keep your shoes quiet. Move on the outside of a table's talk. If you drop a knife, do not look at the floor, look at your guest. People forgive clatter. They do not forgive shame. That last line stuck with me. Shame makes people stare at the wrong thing. Nights like this are built to move eyes away from what matters and toward anything else. The long calendar sharpened around a funeral in early December that not everyone attended, which set the Gambino family on a colder course. In this city, you can miss a train and no one cares. You can miss a dinner and people will joke. You miss a funeral and the week develops a second weather. The kind that does not show on the television map but affects all travel. The people who prefer sidewalks did not discuss it. They did not have to. Weather is understood. By the third week, little gifts began to appear near cash registers. A plate of cookies wrapped in plastic, a stack of cards with winter scene. The baker passed out warm bread ends to kids in knit hats. A beat cop with a scarf as old as his beat traded a story for a free coffee and made the rounds with a smile that said both thank you and keep the peace. The street, for a few nights, believed in goodwill the way a person believes in their own handwriting. The driver adjusted his routine. He arrived earlier, he parked farther away until the last moment. He kept the radio low and tuned to weather and traffic. He cleaned the windshield himself because he did not want anyone else touching the glass. He set the mirrors just so and then tapped the column twice. Each habit clicked into the next, like teeth on a well-cut key. On a mild afternoon, I walked the exact path from a side street to the restaurant door, counting paces as though someone one day might need them. 14 from the corner to the hydrant. 8 more to the door if you hug the wall. 10 if you favour the curb. The bus shelter adds 2 seconds of shadow in the late hour. The deli vent adds a breath of warmth right where most people think they feel a chill. I wrote it down, not for poetry, but for proof. Winter sun left early, and the block took on the blue tone that makes every window look like a lamp, even if no one is inside. I watched 3 men discuss nothing with care. One told a story about shoes that do not squeak. One asked about a cousin who might or might not exist. The third named a street 2 neighbourhoods away and let the name hang. They were not trading facts. They were checking whether their clocks struck the same hour. A city inspector walked by with a clipboard and a pen that did not write on the first try. He shook the pen like a rattle and laughed at himself. He looked at the cones near the hydrant and signed something on his sheet. Whether he signed approval or indifference, I could not tell. But he signed, and that was the point. The week was filling with signatures that let the night believe it had permission. By the week's end, the doorman had seen enough to form an opinion and kept it to himself. He swept salt into neat rows and practiced his wave that said please and thank you without language. He knew which drivers tipped with a nod and which tipped with a bill. He also knew which drivers were not there for tips. He did not change his wave for either. Even hands have rules. The long calendar saved a clean page for the last day. People like to think final pages mean endings. In practice, they mean the beginning has been written elsewhere. The driver wore his best coat, not because the coat mattered, but because the weight of a good coat keeps a person steady. The men who prefer sidewalks pick simple scarves. Complicated scarves stick indoors. In the late afternoon, I visited a tailor for a stitch that did not need stitching. The shop smells of wool and chalk. The tailor set a pin, then removed the pin, then set it again, time spent on a detail no one would see. He told me the city has 2 kinds of thread. The strong kind that holds a seam, the weak kind that marks where you plan to cut. He said the trick is knowing which is which. He smiled as if he had not really told me anything. Perhaps he had told me everything. As dusk gathered, The radio at the newsstand mentioned cold fronts, accidents on a bridge far uptown, and a short segment about the year in review. Names, dates, little recaps with polite music underneath. The vendor frowned at the music and turned it down. He prefers scores and weather. He says news that comes with a melody is already trying too hard. I checked my card. Wind steady from the east, cones still in place, delivery truck due at the cross street just after 7. The driver took a longer route in and planned to approach from a different angle, which would make the last turn smooth. Inside the restaurant, the first tables filled. Outside, the air cooled and made the city sound cleaner, as if the night had been washed and hung to dry. We tell ourselves the month is a series of choices. That is true. It is also a series of arrivals. People arrive at a corner they have seen many times and find it ready in a way they have never seen. They arrive at a time that behaves like a well-trained dog. They arrive at the idea that they will not be the ones to leave first. That last arrival is the one that tightens the chest. When the hour finally came in view, the block did not announce it, it simply held still. The bus shelter light, the deli vent warmth, the doorman's small wave, the driver's exact angle, the practiced walk from corner to door, the sidewalk men who change places without speaking. All of it sat in balance, waiting for the lightest touch to move the lever. I stood near the hydrant with my card in my pocket and the weather in my bones. I told myself what I always tell myself on nights like this. The city is not a plot. It is a schedule. Schedules have consequences. The calendar had been polite, careful, even generous. It had given chance after chance for someone to write a different note in the margin. No one had. The last thing I wrote before I put the card away was not a fact. It was a sentence a teacher once used when the class would not settle. Make ready. That was all. 2 spare words, not an order, a description. The block had made ready. The month had made ready. We had made ready. When I turned toward the restaurant windows, the room looked warm enough to change minds. Men took their seats. Coats went to the rack. A waiter checked a lamp. A hostess smiled the way professionals smile when the first wave is on time. Outside, the lane opened the exact width of a long sedan. It felt like drawing a line with a ruler on clean paper. The long calendar was finished with us for the moment. It had carried us to the edge and rested its hand. The next page would belong to the curb and the door and the cold. The rest of the story would be written not by hours, but by seconds. I could hear the city breathing, slow and even, as if it knew the count and did not intend to miss its cue. Some people belong to rooms. They bloom under chandeliers, collect names like place cards, and leave with stories that sound better with dessert. The men I watched this winter belonged to sidewalks. They chose corners with a view and pretended the city had chosen them first. They were careful, without looking careful. They let the block do most of the talking. There were 4 regulars and 2 floaters. I named them in my head the way a transit map names lines. North face, south face, mailbox, newsstand, float tine, float 2. It kept the card neat and kept me from using names I did not own. Each had a part to play and a reason to stand where he stood. Each could trade places without breaking the shape of the night. North Face favoured the building shadow near the crosswalk. He liked to keep his left shoulder against stone. He said a wall stops 3 kinds of trouble: wind, crowd, and surprise. He wore a plain scarf that did not flap. He never looked up at the restaurant windows. He watched the reflections on the wet street instead, as if read a second set of subtitles. South Face lived opposite the doorman, just far enough to see the whole entrance in one glance. He would check his watch, and then look at nothing. A short study in calm boredom. If anyone drifted into the lane, he stepped forward half a shoe, and the drift corrected itself, like a boat easing away from a pier on a slack tide. He smiled often, and meant none of it in a cruel way. His job was to make ordinary feel genuine. Mailbox leaned a shoulder near the blue metal box that had collected more New Year wishes than any mailbox deserves. He touched the edge with 2 fingers, as if he were aiming a pool shot. From there he could read 3 shop windows and the polished brass of the door. He bought a stamp sometime early in the week and kept the little sheet in his pocket, so if anyone asked, he could say he was choosing a design. He never chose. He liked the undecided posture. Newsstand held down the corner with the radio. He bought gum each time and handed it to kids who asked for sports pages. The vendor called him pal, in a tone that meant he called every man pal. Newsstand liked the way the radio smoothed the minutes. He knew the endings of songs by heart and matched his glances to the downbeats. If you think that is excessive, you have not timed a street. Float 2 and Float 2 were a set. You would see them across, and then behind, and then entering, and then going the other way. They were the moving parts that made the stillness look honest. Float 2 loved a window reflection. He would fix his hair in the glass, which gave him an alibi for seeing both directions at once. Float 2 counted crosswalks with a stride like a musician counting bars. They never spoke to each other on the block. That was the rule. Speak elsewhere. Here you belong to traffic. Their humour was small and mostly about weather. Cold is a tax, Molang said, and warm breath is the only receipt you get. Another claimed the city hands out extra seconds on walk signs in December to build goodwill. They smiled at that, not because they believed it, but because it felt like the kind of kindness a city might try and then forget to mention. If you had followed any ed of them, you would have grown bored. That was the plan. Small loops to a coffee counter, short looks into the glow of a barber that stayed open late for the holiday crowd, checks of a watch that did not need checking. They painted the air with harmless errands until harmless became the whole picture. The city helps with this. It loves errands the way trees love wind. In the late afternoon, the sidewalk crew practiced crossings, from the deli door to the hydrant, from the hydrant to the bus shelter, from the shelter to the curb cut. They learned which spots offered cover when a bus stopped, and which spots exposed a person to the whole room inside the restaurant. They preferred cover that did not look like cover. A man tying his shoe is cover. A man staring at a camera is not cover. They tested signals that felt like the opposite of signals. A glove adjusted in a certain way. A hand that enters a coat pocket and stays there for a slow count of 5. A head tilt that points at the sky, not the street. To anyone else it looked like weather talk. To them it meant not now, or hold the angle. You can build a language out of manners if you have to. Around dusk, Southface tried the door and stepped back out with the easy look of a man who had been told his party was not yet complete. He thanked the hostess and looked mildly pleased by the delay, as if a 5-minute wait were a small gift from the night. He stood near the brass rail and let the warmth touch his coat, then returned to his post. If you only glanced, you would say a friend was running late. You would not be wrong. Northface spoke twice that week, exactly twice, and both times it was to say the same thing in different ways. He said, "The street is never yours, you lease it by the minute." He also said, "The street will always outlast you, so be polite when you borrow it." I wrote those down. They sounded like a man who had learned them by spending rent he wished he had saved. The floaters did the work people mistake for luck. They timed the bus that huffs to a stop 2 stores down. They timed the taxi wave that pulls a yellow car across the lane at just the wrong right moment. They timed the crosswalk rush that blocks a view with 5 winter coats moving like a slow tide. None of it violent, none of it loud. The difference between a clear lane and a busy one is often a bus and a coat. A small incident on Thursday taught the crew what they needed to know. A delivery van paused at the fire hydrant, and the driver hopped out to check the address on a clipboard. The doorman walked over with a soft word. The driver apologized without really apologizing, and moved on. In the wake of that, the curb felt lighter, as if a knot had been loosened by a careful hand. Southface watched the lesson with a pleasant expression. He liked it when courtesy did the heavy lifting. I had my own small lesson. I tried to guess what each man would do if a plan unravelled. Newsstand would sink into the crowd and turn his collar up. Mailbox would cross to the median and become a man waiting for a friend. Northface would simply not be there, which is the cleanest trick of all. Southface would turn into a concerned bystander. Floater and Float 2 would trade speed for smoothness, because speed looks guilty, but smoothness looks like habit. The crew liked unremarkable clothing, nothing that shouted a team or a school, gloves that fit, shoes that did not squeak, coats that looked off the rack and stayed off the rack, hats that kept rain from the eyes without winning compliments. One man carried a folded newspaper that he never opened. He claimed it kept his hand warm. It kept a shape warm, which is nearly the same thing. We talk about courage as if it is loud. Their version was modest. Stand still when standing still is hard. Walk when walking wants to become running. Look bored when interest is all you feel. Breathe in the rhythm of the block, and not in the rhythm of your own head. If you can manage that, you can make your outline match the outlines around you. The city rewards Once, late, I saw the crew break the rule and speak together. It lasted the length of a crosswalk. Southface had a question about wind. Mailbox had a note about glass glare. Float 2 had a thought about the bus schedule being early when the driver is new. They used short words and shorter nods. The light changed, and the meeting dissolved into the evening like sugar into tea. From the restaurant window the scene told a harmless story. A doorman with a kind wave, 2 men comparing coats, a customer on a call, a newsstand buyer choosing gum. The city loves to be read this way. It offers surface language for anyone willing to stop at the first meaning, rather. Where omtes to record reason was en thinking doing antit study and intamta. On Tappet, I kept to my own rules. No staring, no following the same route twice in a row, no writing while I stood still. Notes would wait until a coffee counter, a bus stop, or a church step. I did not pretend I was invisible. I pretended I was busy, which in this town is better. As the week turned toward its last long evening, the crew thinned their gestures to almost nothing. A glance that used to last a second now lasted a half. Steps shortened. Stops became checks, and checks became glances. They were moving toward a timing only they could hear, as if a drummer on a distant street had tapped out a code. At then point, a man in a long coat, with a square jaw and a quiet mouth, crossed the avenue and stood where the sedan would one day pause. He did not stay long. He tested the ground with his heel, as if the pavement might answer a question. Then he left the space for air to occupy. The crew did not look at him. He did not look at them. When he was gone, the block felt both lighter and heavier. That night, the fog returned, the low kind that makes headlights gentle and faces uncertain. The crew welcomed it without saying so. Weather is the best partner. It asks for nothing, gives you cover, and takes credit for mistakes you did not make. The doorman wiped moisture from the brass handle and smiled at a couple who thanked him for the shine. By then I understood the crew's pride. Their art was not in what they might do, but in how little anyone would notice before or after. The trick was to keep the city looking like itself. Streets should be streets. Doors should be doors. waiters should be waiters. If anyone went home thinking the block had been unusual, the crew had failed. They did not fail. On the last rehearsal evening, Southface checked the lane and drifted into a shadow where the wall meets the awning pole. Mailbox touched the blue box and looked toward the reflection that carried the room to him without asking him to enter. Newsstand bought gum and gave it to a kid who did not want gum, and then bought a sports page to make the kid feel rich. The floaters crossed like metronomes and then vanished into the wider rhythm. The driver passed once, twice, and a third time, each pass smoother than the last. He waved at the doorman as if they had an old friendship built on fresh towels and clear lanes. The doorman waved back as if he waved that way at everyone. The crew held their places and let the block hum. It sounded like a birdless winter morning, quiet and expectant. When the hour was almost ready, the sidewalk men made themselves smaller, not by crouching or stepping back, but by becoming part of other stories. One leaned into the glow of the barber shop and asked about a trim he did not want. One admired a coat in a window as if thinking of a gift for a friend. One stood in line at the newsstand and let two people pass him so he could remain in line longer. This is how you erase yourself without leaving. By the time the evening we were building arrived, they looked like regulars on a street play that had opened years ago and would never close. They did not signal. They kept time. They did not stare. They listened to reflections. They did not run. They let traffic write the commas and the period. If you had asked me that night what they believed in, I would have said schedules, winter, and the mercy of small distances. A curb is only a few inches high. A door is only a stride away. A second is only a beat. And yet, arranged with care, those inches, strides, and beats can change the weather of a room. The crew that prefers sidewalks knew this, and carried the knowledge like a folded map. The map was open now, at least in their heads. The lines met at the address with the warm windows. The legend was simple. Be ordinary, be patient. Be where you said you would be when the street reaches for you. They looked calm because they had no other plan. Calm is what remains when plan and place agree. Chapter 4. The city speaks in half sentences when it wants things to move without fuss. People begin thoughts and let the room finish them. Nods do as much work as words. Smiles carry more weight than they should. I walked through a week of unfinished talk and felt how it nudged bodies from table to curb, with the gentlest pressure. At a corner diner, two men met at the counter and ordered coffee. The cups arrived with steam and a small plate of lemon slices no one asked for. One said he preferred early dinners in winter. The other said evenings are better for certain kinds of business. Both were true, and neither was the subject. They spoke in a rhythm designed to make the waitress think tips and not topics. The bill came quickly, and they left without touching the lemon. Across town, in a quiet office, a calendar invite slipped from late afternoon to early evening. The assistant who made the change added a note that said the room will be calmer then. It would be calmer, and it would also be farther from daylight, which matters to people who count reflections. Noah asked for a reason. The reason was the edit. I called a number I rarely use and asked about a table. The host recognized my voice but pretended he did not. He said there was a wait for the good hour but earlier was open. He said later was not an option except for certain names. He did not use any names. He did not need to. He read the list in his head like a prayer he did not believe and still would not forget. A friend who keeps a stool at a bar near the river told me a small story about a missed funeral. He did not say who missed it. He did not say who noticed. He only said the room that night felt like church after the service, where the air speaks and no one argues. In the pause after his story, we both listened to the ice clink against glass and agreed without saying so that some silences are statements. The doorman at Sparks changed his 5-minute breaks to the quarter hour. He told a busser the change helped the back feel better. It did help the back. It also made his absence align with a light that turns the sidewalk into a stage. When he stood in the doorway again, his silhouette framed the glass. He would not have called that theatre. It was theatre. Inside the restaurant, a waiter asked the captain if a certain table could be walked to a different part of the room for a better view. The captain considered, then shook his head. He said the line to the kitchen must stay clear. He meant plates should not collide. He also meant eyes should not have to choose between a door and a body at the wrong time. The staff learned the lesson without learning the lesson. They are professionals. They know how to obey the shape of a night. On the sidewalk, Southface chatted with a man selling scarves from a rolling rack. He tried on a dark muffbahode and asked whether the wool would itch. The seller said only if you run. Southface smiled and said, "Then I am safe." He bought nothing and left the man feeling he had made a sale anyway. It is an art to leave a merchant satisfied when money never changed hands. Newsstand asked the vendor about a song on the radio. The vendor said it was a hit from years ago and hummed a few bars. Newsstand nodded as if the melody had just refreshed some fond memory. What it refreshed was the timing of the bridge, which lasts the same number of seconds as the distance between the hydrant and the bus shelter at an easy walk. He marked it in the body, not in a notebook. The body is the only metronome that matters when you cannot look down. In the late afternoon, I took a walk with the driver. We did not say it was a walk, we called it a route check. He pointed to small things that cannot be explained unless you have spent too many years inside a car. The crown of the road pulls you right just before the door. The sun at a certain hour throws a blade of light across the hood that hides a face in the reflection. A bus that stops even 2 feet off line clogs the lane and adds a full minute to your approach. He said it all calmly, the way a baker talks about dough. He asked me about the doorman. I said the man has a wave that says both please and not now. The driver said he respects that. He respects anyone who can ask for space without making a scene. He also asked whether the cones near the hydrant were still in place. I told him when had rolled and been set back by a kid who liked order. The driver smiled at that. He likes kids who like order. They keep the city's edges neat. At a barber shop with a fogged window, Floatmeat stepped in and asked for a quick clean-up. The barber trimmed nothing of importance and charged a small price. Floatmeat talked about the weather and shoes and a restaurant with a long history. He looked at his reflection and then at the reflection behind his reflection, where the doorway of the steakhouse shaped itself in the glass like a second room. He paid and tipped and left with a line of sight learned without seeming to look. A tailor fixed a hem for a man who did not care about hems. The tailor took a little longer than necessary. He told the man a story about thread and patience and the difference between a stitch that holds and a stitch that marks where to cut. The man nodded and did not listen. The tailor knew he was teaching for a different student. He looked at me when he said the word patience. I looked back and wrote it on the card. The week's conversations began to share a music. Questions with no question marks. Answers that fit many questions. I heard the phrase "I will circle back 5 times in one day" from 5 mouths that do not know each other and do not plan to. The city loves a phrase that means everything and nothing. It oils the joints. It keeps the noise down. In private rooms, the talk grew softer. A man at a long table said the word stability in a tone that meant change. Quiet rooms traded the names Paul Castellano and John Gotti without heat, as if the city itself would grade the exam. Another man said the word family in a tone that meant business. No one corrected these translations because they are as old as the block. In the small space after those words, a third man stirred his drink and watched the way the ice turned a little and then settled. He did not add his word. He did not need to. On a staircase to a mezzanine, a hostess told a busser to hold a party at the bar for 5 minutes. She said the kitchen needed to breathe. The busser nodded and smiled and made a joke about toes and shoes. He believed her. The kitchen did need to breathe. So did the front door. Sometimes the only way to slow a room is to tell the ovens to inhale. A call reached the driver and lasted less than a minute. He said thank you twice and then repeated the time back to the voice. He did not ask who else had heard that time. He did not ask who would be waiting. He did not need to. Schedules are more faithful than people, which is why people spend their lives trying to keep up with them. I ran into a priest who had moved parishes 3 times in 10 years, and who always knows when a corner is restless. He said the block looked fine, he said the faces looked fine, he said the air felt like a page about to turn. He is a man who reads rooms for a living and never writes down what he reads. He put a hand on my shoulder and told me to stay warm. That is priest for do not be a hero. I promised nothing and agreed to everything. Near closing at a deli, Mailbox bought a small sandwich he did not want and split it with a man who did. The man said thanks and asked the time. Mailbox told him the wrong time by 2 minutes. He did this kindly and on purpose. 2 minutes make a bus miss a light and then catch the next wit, which lifts a curtain just where you need a curtain lifted. You would not notice unless you were looking. He was looking. Flo 2 took a slow tour past the steakhouse and checked the reflections in the cab doors. He loved cab doors for their honesty. They show you what the street wants you to see and hide you from what you should not be. He timed across with a couple who were arguing about nothing. He let the argument set the pace. It kept his face neutral. It kept his shoulders loose. It told any watcher that he cared about a stranger's quarrel more than about the door across the street. The driver parked 2 blocks away and walked the last distance. He counted his steps and then forgot the number on purpose. He believes numbers can make a man brittle when he should be flexible. He believes the right answer is a range and not a point. He believes the car should arrive as if it had been invited by the lane. He believes many things like this, and they have kept him alive. By late week, conversations had narrowed to the useful words: soon, after, before, here, there, left, right, wait, go. A city that spends most days on adjectives can become a poem of prepositions when it needs to. The poem was almost done. The last word would not be said inside. It would be said by a door opening to winter air. I took the last walk past the warm windows. A waiter lifted a lamp and set it down again. A hostess traced a line through a name. The doorman returned from a quarter-hour break and took his place. Inside, people raised glasses and spoke the soft talk of December. Outside, the block took a breath and held it. The talk had done its work. What remained needed no words. From the sidewalk, the room glows like a promise. Linen like snow, glass like thin ice, brass like a small sun. The curb keeps its darker promise, a band of wet asphalt that reflects all that light and offers none of its warmth. Between them, the door swings, a hinge that decides who belongs where and for how long. Inside, the room performs its winter ritual. A captain walks the edge of the floor with the smooth pace of a skater who knows where every rut hides. A runner drifts between tables with plates that breathe a little smoke. A busser stacks bread plates so quietly it sounds like snowfall. The broiler men in the back keep the rhythm steady, a low thunder that suggests power and not trouble. The warmth does a second job beyond comfort. It slows time. Men who would speak in quick bursts soften their words. Laughter settles into the corners like cushions. A hand rests on a tablecloth, longer than manners require, and no one protests. The room convinces everyone that the night can be held. The curb disagrees. Outside, the cold edits the block. It trims anything that is not necessary. A glance shrinks to a check. A nod loses its flourish. Conversations end 2 words earlier. The doorman feels it in his knuckles, and so do the men who choose the sidewalk. They are all experts in what the air is allowed to take. On a mild night, the driver might cut the last turn wide and swoop in with a feeling. Tonight, he will make a square approach. He will show the lane respect. He will pause at the proper distance and drift forward a measured length, enough to give the doorman time to shift a step, and not enough to force him to retreat. The space between car and door is not a gap. It is a negotiation. Inside the window at Sparks, 3 older men and a younger bud held a quiet lane of talk, while East 46th Street kept time. The older men have coats with weight and watches that do not flash. They eat slowly. The younger man cuts his steak too quickly. A waiter notices the pace and decides to slow the table with a question about wine that no one needs. He pours with care and talks about the grape and the soil as if the evening depends on both. It does not. It depends on the pour. The pour adds seconds. A couple at a corner 2 top leans closer. They are the only people in the room who look like they might be in love with the idea of the season. He tells her that winter makes the city honest. She tells him that winter makes people honest. They are trying on truths like coats. Across from them, a man checks his watch and decides it's to rise. He was going to make a call. He was going to stretch his legs. He sits and asks for coffee instead. The warmth has won another minute. On the curb, South Face reads the reflections in the sedan windows rolling past. He likes how glass lies with grace. It gives you an angle and then takes it away. The bus shelter light throws a rectangle onto the street, a little stage that moves when a bus nudges the air. He notes a man in a hat who keeps changing sides of the street for no reason a tourist would understand. The man is not lost. He is measuring. The doorman keeps his hands open. Palms say everything a person needs to hear on a block like this. Please wait. Please come ahead. Not yet. Now. He learned those words without class because the curb teaches in real time with generous or harsh grades. He prefers generous. Tonight he will ask the curb for courtesy and hope the street answers in kind. In the kitchen the broiler flares and calms. A cook calls for a 2-minute rest on a cut that looks impatient. The chef nods. He trusts the cook and his own eye. He also trusts the clock over the door. The clock keeps restaurant time, which is not wall time and not wrist time. It is plate time. Plate time can be stretched if the floor is clever. Tonight the floor is clever. The hostess is clever too. She holds a party at the bar when she could seat them by the window. She says, a better table is clearing. It is not. She wants that window open for someone who has not arrived. She smiles when she speaks, and the party feels chosen and not delayed. Chosen is a powerful word in a room built on reservation. At the newsstand, the radio reports a score and then the weather. A cold line dipping from the north. The vendor says the word crisp like a chef says the word finish. Newsstand buys gum he does not need and gives it to a boy who insists he prefers mints. The boy takes the gum anyway, because gifts are gifts, even when they are not mints. The driver checks the final approach in his head. From the light he will make a careful right. He will watch the crown of the road pull him, and he will lean against it with the wheel. He will see the brass of the door, and he will choose the exact distance that allows what clean step. He will not think about the rest. He cannot. His job is distance. Seconds belong to someone else. Inside, the younger man at the table puts his fork down and wipes his mouth with a napkin. He looks at the older men for approval and receives none, which is a form of approval. He asks about a meeting that almost happened and did not. One of the older men says the phrase another time. It is not a promise, it is a boundary. The younger man nods and learns. A waiter near the service station lifts a lamp to adjust the shade and sees himself for a moment as a figure in a painting that hangs in his grandmother's hallway. Light, hands, brass, winter. He sets the lamp down with a small sigh he would deny making. He straightens the right angle of a knife and feels the night click of notch toward its mark. On the curb, the two floaters loosen their loops. They are less interested in covering distance now and more interested in covering time. They cross with a group, then let a gap open, then cross without a group. They align their pace to the gathering sense that the block has stopped breathing in and is about to breathe out. They do not speak. They do not look at each other. The map in their heads folds to a single corner. North Face and mailbox trade posts for the first time in an hour. The trade is slow enough to be invisible and fast enough to matter. Mailbox touches the blue metal once, a ritual that keeps his hands honest. North Face checks the shadow line near the crosswalk and smiles without smiling. The shadow line is where it should be. The winter night has come to heal. A taxi stops mid-block and waves at the doorman with the urgency of someone who thinks valet is public service. The doorman shakes his head and points down the street. The taxi groans away. The doorman hates to deny anyone in winter. He also loves a clean lane at the right moment. He forgives himself with a little nod. Inside, the couple at the two-top argues gently about where to go after dinner. They both say anywhere warm. They both mean stay here longer. The captain senses the wish and offers coffee and a dessert menu they will not use. He keeps them in place with the kindness of someone who has seen too many good plans fail because people stood up at the wrong time. A bus sighs to a stop at the shelter and blocks the view. For 10 seconds the sidewalk is a stage with a curtain. South Face looks down at his shoes. Float 2 pretends to wave at a friend. North Face scratches his wrist and checks the stone beside him. Mailbox folds the stamp sheet in half as if considering a choice. The bus leaves and the stage is open again. The block has adjusted its breath. The driver rolls the last turn in his mind again. He decides to count to 3 at the light before he moves. Not 2, but 3. This gives a pedestrian time to make a late decision. This keeps him from arriving on top of the doorman's step. This makes the sedan appear patient rather than eager. Patient is the better story when the room is full of eyes that pretend they are not eyes. In the kitchen, a small delay spreads like heat. One plate waits for a garnish. Another waits for a sauce that wants more breath on the flame. No one announces the delay. The line simply absorbs it. When the captain asks if the table is ready, the chef answers with a plate and a nod. The answer is yes, and also not yet. The floor receives the meaning and lets 3 more minutes melt into the room without anyone feeling the melt. The doorman feels the evening concentrate. It happens sometimes, like sugar water reaching that point where crystals can form. He clears the rail with the ease of a man who wants a clear picture for the next guest. He steps back, hands open, small foot slightly behind the other, weight balanced. He looks at nothing and sees everything. The crew takes up their final resting shapes. Newsstand has change for anyone who asks. Mailbox is a man who has almost chosen a stamp. North face is part of a wall. South face is a smile with no reason. Floaters are passers-by who might have been born crossing streets. The driver is a mile and a minute away and closing both measures. The restaurant is a hearth. The curb is a line. I stand near the hydrant and pretend to wonder about dinner. I put my hands in my pockets and take them out again, as if I cannot decide between warmth and readiness. I tell myself that this is what cities do. They bring warm rooms and cold curbs into conversation and ask which judge will speak last. Tonight I think the curb will have the final word. Inside, the room glows. Outside, the air keeps its edge. The door is the hinge between patience and decision. The hinge is about to turn. Names carry furniture. They come with chairs you cannot move, tables that do not fit through doors, and portraits that stare no matter where you hang them. In certain rooms a name arrives 5 minutes ahead of the person who wears it, and stands by the door like a quiet usher. Tonight the usher was already in place. In the warm room men talked about business while using words that sound comfortable to strangers. Stability, opportunity, supply, words that make a winter menu out of the cold world. The staff let the words pass like steam, paying attention only to the temperature of plates and the slope of time. The room was a ceremony, not a council. Still, a name can turn ceremony into verdict without anyone raising a hand. On the curb the name moved like weather. It gathered across blocks, skimmed along awnings, and came to rest under the glow of the brass-handled door. The men who lived on sidewalks did not say it. They had said it enough already in other places. Now they watched the air react, as if a certain pressure meant snow and another pressure meant rain. The weight was familiar. Familiar is not the same as easy. The driver understood weight the way a mason understands stone. He did not say the name. He measured space with it. A name like that requires a clean lane and a door that swings once, not twice. It requires no horn and no search for a spot. It requires everything to look effortless. He adjusted his route as if he were carrying a wide mirror, and did not want to nick the frame. Inside, a waiter told a new hire the simple rules of deference. Place the plate with the name first. Do not hover. Listen with your shoulders and not your ears. The new hire nodded and practiced the motion of setting a plate without drawing attention to his hand. He did not know the history of the dining room. He did not need to. He needed to know how gravity behaves near certain tables. Gravity is heavier there. The weight belonged to the name Paul Castellano, a winter name in Midtown, and to Thomas Bellotti beside him. It had been defended in some rooms and set aside in others. Men used the phrase Gambino family as if it were weather. Some belonged to summers of celebration, some belonged to winters of accounting. This name was in the winter drawer, where the air is clear and the hours keep their promises. Mailbox had once seen the man himself pass a window, and had been surprised by how ordinary a famous gate can look. Great names rarely change how a person walks. They change how other people arrange themselves around that walk. Tonight the arrangement mattered more than the feet. He looked at the blue metal box and thought about letters that never find their destination. The city survives on those two. North Face considered the way respect is measured on a street, not by volume, not by greetings, by the tidy space a body is given while moving from car to door. A man who can pass through 10 feet of winter without being touched by a sleeve, a bag, a question, or a camera. That is a measure you cannot fake. He eyed the line from curb to brass and found it clean. The respect had been prepared. Inside the kitchen, a cook who did not follow the papers still knew the name. He had learned it from the tone of a captain's voice 3 rooms away. He salted with care that felt almost like piety, and then laughed at himself for thinking such a thought. He believed in heat and timing. He believed in paying attention when the room changes density. He felt the change and shaved his garnish thinner to keep the plate light. Southface weighed the name against the street's habit of swallowing even the loudest stories. He decided the street would do its usual work once the moment had passed. Cabs would hon again. The newsstand radio would return to a song that everyone pretends they do not like and then hums anyway. That is what the city promises. Continuity. Still, you prepare for the moment when continuity holds its breath. In a small office 2 neighborhoods away, a man who had done math for a living told a friend that power can be counted like cash, but kept like ice. Hold it too tight and it melts, leave it alone and it becomes a hazard. The friend asked what to do instead. The numbers man said, "Find a glass and keep filling it." The friend laughed without humor. They both looked out at a street where the lamps made halos of the cold. The waiter with the lamp in his hand looked again at the table near the window, where 3 older men and a younger man sat. He had served them before. He knew how their jokes landed without smiles, how their silences could mean comfort or warning. He set the lamp down and tightened the shade. He checked the reflection in the glass to make sure the glow did not blind the camera of a man who might someday sit across the street. He had no proof a camera was there. Proof is not always the point. The doorman ran his palm over the rail and thought of the men who taught him the craft. Names had crossed this threshold like weather for years. Some were heavy with thunder, some carried only drizzle. He had learned to greet each without ceremony. He preferred to grant dignity to the body in front of him and let the name do what it would in the air. Tonight he would give the same frank nod he gives to office clerks and to captains. Equal courtesy. Equal distance. Float was returned from a loop and touched the barber's glass with a knuckle as if testing the temperature of something that cannot be measured. That way he kept his pace mild. He thought about the shape of a widely known person and how that shape fits into the narrow slot of a curbside arrival. He pictured lines of sight like strings. He pictured where they might tangle. He chose routes that left the strings tidy. Flo too liked to think of names as chords. Some resolve, some hang on the ear. This each hung and demanded a landing. He found the rhythm in the crosswalk lights and matched his step to the pattern. Stop, pause, go, go. He tried the sequence twice and let it sink into his body. He would not count later. He would feel. Feeling is cleaner in the final minute. A small party by the bar asked the hostess whether a certain table could be theirs after dessert. She smiled and promised to see what she could do. She could do nothing. The table belonged to the evening, not to the party. She kept smiling. The party kept hoping. Hopes like that are the lace of a room. Pretty, weightless, and often in the way. She knew how to drape it so Noah tripped. The driver caught a yellow light and did not push. He let it go and came to a stop with room to breathe. He adjusted the mirror and watched a man in a brown hat touch the brim and then touch it again. The driver did not like repeated motions. Repetition can be signal, can be nerves, can be nothing. He catalogued it and then set it aside. The next light would be the one that mattered. He moved his hands on the wheel as if sweeping crumbs from a table. In a nearby club where the piano always sounds better after midnight, a musician mentioned the name and then refused to tell a story. He played a soft tune instead, and the room decided the tune stood in for the story. It was not rumour, and it was not testimony. It was acknowledgement. The way a church bell notes an hour without comment on its contents. The city is full of people who need names to do their work. Clerks, captains, drivers, critics, cops, priests, and the rest. Some use names as tools, some use them as shields, some use them as keys. Tonight the name unlocked a lane and locked a schedule. You could feel it in the way the cold grew attentive. Even the air seemed to hold back from fogging the glass. The younger man at the window table asked a question with more courage than tact. He wanted to know if the season would end with a change, or if the change had already ended the season. The oldest of the three answered by buttering bread that he did not intend to eat. He set the knife down and said the word business, with the respect some men reserve for the word winter. The younger man heard what he needed and not what he wanted. That is how instruction works in rooms like this. By now the sidewalk crew had become part of the street's furniture. There were coat hooks and lamp posts, ash cans and door frames. If you had described the block to a friend, you would have listed them as landmarks without knowing you had. The weight of the name had pressed them into the scene until movement would look unnatural. That was the point. Stillness is a disguise that only works if you can wear it lightly. They wore it lightly. The doorman glanced down the avenue, and then at the clock he did not carry. He felt the money arriving the way a sailor feels a swell before it reaches the bow. He breathed once, deep and quiet. He adjusted the tilt of his hat. Hats are not important. Hats are signals to the person wearing them. He told himself he was ready. He was. Inside, the captain made a final pass along the edge of the floor. He set a stray menu square and touched the back of a chair to align it with a table leg. He did not know he had synchronized his small corrections with the driver's slow approach 3 blocks away. People aligned themselves in separate rooms and called it professionalism. It was also a choreography no one had written down. The driver took the last turn before the light that would spill him into the block. He let a bus pull ahead to clear a lane. He let a woman with a bag cross at a diagonal because she had chosen her path and he respected commitment. He smiled at his own thought. Respecting commitment is a driver's joke. It is also a safety principle. He checked the crown of the road, the glare on the hood, the brass in the distance, the long breath in his chest. The name had done its work. It had gathered eyes without summoning a crowd. It had stiffened backs without starting a debate. It had enlisted schedules without anyone signing a paper. All that remained was an arrival measured in inches and seconds, where the furniture of reputation would meet the furniture of a curb. The city waited with its polite face on. The room was warm. The curb was cold. The door was ready to write its line. Fate is a word for people who do not map lanes. In this town, traffic decides more than omens do. Lights stack, buses sigh, pedestrians drift, and the city writes commas and periods with steel, rubber, and habit. The evening had reached the point where inches mattered, and seconds were a currency. The block prepared to pay in both. The last approach along East 46th Street, between 3rd and Lexington, is never bus A-turn. It was a small sequence taught by practice. From the cross street, the driver would catch the green that lived longer when the bus cleared the box. He would coast the crown of the road and let the car settle into the right side without touching the drain grate that throws a wheel for half a beat. He would let a cab pass because the cab always feels it owns the curb. He would not argue with the story a cab tells itself. He would write a different story beside it. Up the block, the bus shelter light flickered and held. It gave the pavement a stage quality, a rectangle that moved a little on the wet ground. Float 2 reached it just as the flicker calmed and felt his pace, synced to the heartbeat of the box. He crossed in the wake of 2 office workers who were arguing about an end-of-year report that had gone missing. The argument carried the group like a mild wind. He liked wind you could borrow. Newsstand timed a sale to the weather report. The radio voice said a cold line would settle in by midnight with clear skies and slick streets. He passed change to a man in a scarf and counted 1, 2, 3 seconds with the coins. He looked like a clerk and behaved like a metronome. A car door shut somewhere behind him, and he registered the note without looking. The note said calm. That was good. Calm hides intent. Southface adjusted the idea of his smile. Wider, just a fraction warmer, enough to make a pedestrian choose his side of the pole instead of the other. That choice matters when a lane opens. People do not think about poles and which side they pass when the air is cold and the lights are bright. Southface thinks of little else. He moved Dunn Shoe half a length and created an old-fashioned courtesy that also created a clear path. Northface tapped the stone with 2 knuckles and watched a taxi idle too close to the crosswalk. The driver took a call and waved at the line of cars behind him, the wave that means I am almost done, when he is not almost done. Northface did nothing, which was the correct action. Doing nothing keeps a street from choosing drama. The cab rolled forward in time, the crosswalk cleared. Mailbox put the stamp sheet away and exchanged it for a glove. He folded once. The glove made him a man with business to finish. Men with business to finish do not stare into restroom windows. They look across the street as if deciding between warmth now and warmth later. The choice gives the eyes something to do besides measure. He already knew the measures. Inside, the captain touched the back of the chair closest to the door and made sure it did not creep into the aisle. A creeping chair can add a half step to a path at the worst time. He did not know about the worst time. He knew about chairs. He aligned it and moved on, the light off his watch face drawing a neat arc across his knuckle. The driver caught the green. He let the bus ahead bleed off speed and then tucked into the lane behind it where the wind is cleanest. He checked the hood glare, the brass glint, the side mirror tilt. He had driven this edge of the city so often that the curb felt like a friend who prefers punctuality. He lifted his foot, felt the weight shift forward, and allowed the car to be patient. He liked that word, patient. It is the opposite of showy. Pedestrians made small choices that mattered. A woman stepped back from the curb to fix a scarf and gave the sedan more yard. A man with a bag stopped to answer a question on his phone, from someone who had asked the same question twice already. A couple laughed and paused in the lane of light instead of outside it. They were in love with their own reflection for a second, and love often obeys traffic without knowing it. A delivery truck further down the block idled with a soft cough and filled the gutter with a low fog. The fog did what fog does. It lowered edges and gentled light. It made shapes kinder and seconds longer. Float let it pass over his shoes and felt his outline fade at the ankle. He loved that trick. People look at faces and hands. Shoes live near the truth. At the door, the doorman checked his balance and felt the brass cool under his fingertips. He glanced once to the left, once to the right, then fixed his gaze on a harmless point across the avenue. The harmless point keeps guests feeling seen without being singled out. It also keeps him from telegraphing what he knows about the lane. His wave was ready, a script in 4 words that reads as courtesy and performs as direction. The light at the corner cycled, red stacked on yellow, stacked on green. The driver watched the pedestrian signal flip with a small bounce, the way old bulbs do when the circuit is tired. He counted to 3 after the green, a private rule that prevents all manner of collisions. 1 for the walker who realizes late, 2 for the cyclist who believes he is a ghost, 3 for the driver who thinks red means maybe. Then he moved, slow enough for dignity, quick enough for the timing of the room. Inside, the window table breathed in a rhythm of wine and quiet remarks. The younger man set his fork down and reached for water. He understood that the night had entered a narrow hallway. He did not know how narrow. A waiter poured, steady hand, eyes on the glass, shoulders listening to the door without appearing to. The staff are musicians. They hold notes and watch the conductor who is not a person, but the room itself. A taxi of the block flashed its brake lights twice. Not a signal, just a driver annoyed at a lane change that moved like a tired thought. Even annoyances obeyed a subtle order. The block had trained them all week. The crew liked to think they trained the block. The block liked to think it trained them. The truth sat between. Northface stepped from stone to shadow to stone, a move so slight that only the wall noticed. The wall approved. He had an old habit of asking permission from inanimate things. Walls have kept better secrets than people. He set his shoulder again and let the cold trim his breath. Newsstand sold a lottery ticket to a man who said tonight felt lucky. The vendor wished him well. The man laughed and said, "Not like that, just in the small ways." He folded the ticket and tucked it into the brim of his hat for a joke only he would enjoy later. He stepped away and created a clean gap at the corner where none had been. Southface let a tourist ask for directions to a hotel 2 avenues away. He pointed gently with an open hand and constructed a path that would keep the tourist from doubling back into the curb at the wrong time. The tourist thanked him and called him sir, with an accent that made the word sound older. Southface smiled into the cold and accepted the accidental courtesy. The driver rolled into the block, past the bus shelter glow, past the pudder that wanted to pull a wheel, past the memory of every approach he had learned. He lined the hood with the door and breathed. Hands easy, eyes soft, mind quiet. The sedan glided to the place where distance becomes invitation. The doorman stepped. The lane agreed. Traffic made room as if it had been told a story and wanted to hear the end. The sidewalk tightened, what with panic, with purpose. Float 2 slowed a half beat. Float toe matched a couple's pace for cover. Mailbox turned his face toward the blue metal and saw everything in the reflection. North face held the stone. South face lifted the smallest smile that means please, not now. Newsstand handed a bag to a woman with exact change. The rhythm did not break. It shifted key. Inside, a chair leg that might have drifted stayed true. A waiter whose heel might have squeaked did not. A table that might have asked for coffee waited for dessert instead. Little mercies arrived at once. The waylights pop on along a dark river when the switch is thrown. The room held its warm note. The curb prepared to answer in its colder key. Traffic had decided many things without speaking. It had placed the sedan where it needed to be. It had sent the bus on and the taxi away. It had found the couple who would shield an angle, and the tourist who would not step back into a lane. It had given the doorman his clean step, and the driver his clean line. It had given the sidewalk crew a curtain, and then drawn it back. Later, people would say fate. They would say the name, and then the word inevitable. I will not argue. I will only add that the signals changed, and the gears of the city did what they always do when well-oiled and watched. They turned. The block clicked into position. The door, the lane, the lights, the bodies, the breath. All the small engineers had done their work. The next measure would be counted in seconds. In the last stretch before an arrival, the city becomes an accountant. It does not speak in grand totals. It tallies steps and seconds, door swings and head turns, the tiny entries that make up a ledger no one will see. If you listen, you can hear the pencil. Scratch, pause, scratch. The driver set the sedan the right distance from the brass at Sparks on East 46th Street. He counted not with numbers but with distance, felt through the wheel and the seat. A touch forward for dignity, a breath to let air out of the lane. A glance to the left mirror where headlights lined up like obedient students. He was not proud of the craft. He was faithful to it. Faithfulness looks like pride from a distance. The doorman stepped into his mark, left hand half open, right hand ready for the handle. Weight where it belongs for a fast pivot that still looks like courtesy. He did not hurry. Hurry is poor manners. The trick is to make ready without calling attention to the making. He smiled at no one and at everyone. The smile was a signal only to himself. Steady. Inside, the captain finished a pass and left the aisle clear. A runner paused at the service station with 2 plates that could wait the length of one deep breath. The kitchen held a simmer. The floor owned the seconds now. In a warm room, people believe the night is theirs. In truth, the staff owns time and rents it by the minute. Newsstand slid a paper into a bag for a woman who had counted her coins with care. He gave her work coin back and called it a holiday discount. She smiled and gave the coin to a boy who did not need it, but loved the ceremony. The trade took 1 second longer than usual. That single second moved a small knot of pedestrians 3 feet back from the curb. The ledger noted it. Northface pressed his shoulder to the stone and let the cold climb the seam of his coat. He counted steps in the bodies that moved past him. 4 to the crosswalk, 2 to the shelter edge, 6 to the rail. He watched for the stutter in a gate that says a person will stop when they should not. Tonight, the gates were honest. Winter can be a teacher like that. Mailbox folded the stamp sheet once more and tucked it deep. Hands free, eyes soft. Posture of a man who will write a letter later and not tonight. He counted the breaths between his checks of the glass. 3 and look. 3 and look. He liked rhythm that left room for thought. Rhythm without air makes mistakes. Float ghosted along the barber's window and read the dining room in reflection. The lamp was steady, the chair leg true, the captain out of the aisle. He liked reflections because they reverse the world and make it new. New makes your attention sit up. He counted how many faces were turned toward the door. Fewer than 5. Just right. Flo 2 took the crosswalk on the slow count he had stored in his legs from the signal pattern. He matched the stride of a man with a briefcase. Scuffed at the corners by an ordinary life, he counted the beats in their steps and let his head turn on the offbeat, which looks like curiosity and not surveillance. He knew he would remember the number long after he forgot the reasons. The body keeps the useful parts for later. The drive had eased to a stop at a distance that honoured both the door and the person it would open for. He did not nose too close. He did not leave a gap that made the doorman step into the lane for longer than politeness allows. He let the engine hum low and even. He counted the beat of that hum against the changing of the pedestrian signal. When the world counts for you, you return the favour. Inside, the younger man at the window table felt a stretch in the air he could not name. He reached for his water, then left the glass untouched. He looked at the older men and saw nothing in their faces that helped. He felt he should speak, and did not. Silence sometimes honours a room better than talk. He counted to 5, and the need to speak went away like a wave that changes its mind at the sand. The doorman reached for the handle and felt the cool brass the way a musician feels a key before a note. He counted the steps he would take backward after the swing, 1 and 2, to make room and to keep sight of the lane. He adjusted his hat, because rituals calm hands, rituals calm nights too. Down the block a bus took on 3 passengers instead of 5. The driver closed the door early. That put the bus at the light ahead of schedule by an amount no one would argue over. The bus cleared the view that might have become a curtain for the wrong 10 seconds. The ledger marked a credit. Southface checked a watch and smiled at a stranger who took the smile as permission to pass. The stranger angled left instead of right and left the doorman a step of clean air. Southface counted the gift and filed it under luck. He knew it was not luck. He also knew the word is useful. Newsstand hummed the bridge of the song he liked. He did not know the words, only the length. His hum walked the seconds across the corner while his hands folded a paper with the care of someone wrapping a present he cannot afford. He passed it across the counter and created a small pause at the exact time a pause was needed. Northface felt the moment settle like a bird that has decided which wire to land on. He rolled his shoulders once, left, then right, as if warming a stiffness that did not exist. The motion drew a pair of eyes for a heartbeat, and then returned them to their errands. He counted the glance, and then forgot it on purpose. Not every count deserves the ledger. The driver looked through the windshield and saw not the room but the edges of the room. Frame and glass, brass and shadow. He counted the reflection of his own lights in the pane and lowered them a notch. He liked his arrivals to look kind. Kind arrivals make for kinder exits. Inside, the captain lifted a hand the width of a coin, which signalled a waiter to hold. The waiter held. 2 plates waited with dignity. The kitchen breathed once. The dining room kept its warm murmur. The captain counted to 3 for reasons he could not have explained to anyone who does not know what it means to care about timing, in a world that pretends timing is natural. A man on the sidewalk chose to tie his shoe at the edge of the lane, and then, without knowing why, chose to stand instead. He stepped back to the bus shelter to do the task. His choice opened the space like a curtain drawn to the side. He did not feel generous. He felt cold. Generosity often travels under other names. The door swung. The doorman stepped back. Warm air spilled with the light. For a second the room and the curb met and exchanged their temperatures. The driver watched the angle and counted the time it would take a person to place a foot, rise from the seat, take a second step, and claim the sidewalk. He had learned that count across decades and 100 doors. He did not speak it. He did not need to. Mailbox, read the glass again and saw the bright shape a man makes when light chooses him. He did not blink. He counted the frames between sight and recognition. 1 for shape, 1 for coat, 1 for the tilt of a hat. He did not need to know the face. He knew the gravity. Gravity identifies itself. Flow 2 mirrored the couple beside him, laughing when they laughed, pausing when they paused, turning when they turned. He was a shadow that planned, a reflection with intent. He counted the half steps that make a person seem undecided. Indecision is cover. He wore it like a scarf. Flow 2 opposed him on the near corner, a second hand on the same watch. He counted cross-traffic, 1 slow car, 1 faster, a gap long enough to move through without looking hurried. He stepped just to the edge and held. Holding is an action. It is the one most people forget to respect. Inside, the younger man's glass stayed full. The older men kept their eyes on him, not the door. Their discipline had the softness of experience. They did not deny the pull of the door, they simply did not bow to it. A waiter appeared with a small plate the table had not ordered. The gift arrived with a sentence still in the air. It changed no facts. It governed seconds. The city is not a poet tonight. It is a clerk. It writes the smallest line items and adds them on a page that will be tossed after the audit. Step 1. Step 2. Pause. Turn. Breath. Door. Curb. In those tiny entries lives the difference between design and accident, between story and noise. The doorman's hand moved the last inch to clear the brass. The driver's foot held the last ounce on the brake. The pedestrians kept their quiet bargains with wind and light. The sidewalk crew wore their disguises of patience and errand. The warm room kept its hove, the cold kept its edge. The ledger turned a page and waited for the pen. The scene is ordinary until it decides not to be. A door, a car, a restaurant glow, furniture in a postcard. Then the air changes weight, and the curb learns intention. That thin stretch of wet asphalt becomes a stage lit by brass and mistake. The players already know their marks. The driver glides to rest in the lane that has been kept clean for hours. The turn signal blinks once and then sleeps. The engine sighs into a low hum, not silence but the breath between sentences. He keeps his hand on the wheel, eyes forward, performing the calm of professionalism. Calm is the suit that keeps a driver unseen. The doorman takes half a step forward, his hand open in greeting. He sees only movement, a motion that fits his training, a passenger about to emerge from warmth into cold. He feels the door handle cool under his glove, and turns it as he has hundreds of times before. The muscle memory carries him, not thought. Inside, the table nearest the window has reached its quietest point. Forks down, bills approaching, coffee cooling, words rationed to the essentials. The older men have stopped giving orders or advice. The younger man finds his focus on the clean fold of a bread napkin. The silence is heavy but rehearsed. Every diner in the room hears it without knowing what it means. Silence is a professional here. Flow 2 drifts through the crosswalk, shoulders curved against the cold, head low, face lost in scarf and hat. His stride is even, the rhythm of a man with errands completed. Float 2 appears across the avenue, a reflection, another faceless commuter, Elmer. Between them the space narrows until it feels preordained. They are two commas on the same line, preparing to close a sentence. South Face watches the headlights skim the brass and thinks, now the frame is drawn. North Face nods once to himself, a habit he has when patience reaches its purpose. Mailbox adjusts his coat with the deliberate care of a man sheltering something fragile. Newsstand hums a few notes of the same old song, a bridge that disguises nerves. None of them move quickly. Motion in winter should always look deliberate. The passenger door opened onto the cold curb outside Sparks Steakhouse in Midtown Manhattan. Paul Castellano stepped once, then again, with Thomas Bellotti moving in the same breath. From within the sedan, another shape begins to shift. Under the streetlight it could be a driver leaning forward, could be nothing at all. The sidewalk men let the haze choose what can be seen. They do not stare. Staring invites witness. They practice glimpses. The doorman opens fully a quarter turn of grace. One sentence away, inside the restaurant, the captain feels the draft and glances Bope. He will never know why he did. Reflex, he assumes. Reflex is just another word for instinct you trust. He sees the doorway flood with light, then closes his eyes for no reason. The block inhales. Pedestrians slow without meaning to. A bus slows because the pedestrian slowed. The signal holds for a beat too long. The rhythm changes key. Movement becomes line, and line becomes tableau. If anyone filmed these seconds, they would swear the cast had rehearsed. Flow 2 closes the distance to the curb. Flow 2 mirrors him, opposite side. Their shoulders align with the silhouette by the car. They lift nothing yet. They only lift their attention to the level where acts begin. Breath fogs, coats whisper, fingers flex. The fog thickens just enough to make outlines soft. Inside, glassware hums. A phone rings in the bar, small and unwanted. The hostess lifts the receiver and says the word waiting into it, once, gently, then listens. The person on the other end does not respond. She thinks the line is dead. She replaces the handset. That one motion times the street like a bell. The passenger clears the door. The doorman welcomes. A beat of familiarity flickers between professionals. "Good evening," he says without sound. The passenger nods, the way people nod when the temperature is not what they expected. His hat tilts. His sleeve lifts. He is halfway to the second step. From the far edge of the lane, somewhere near the shadow where the billboard light fails, there is motion that resolves into purpose. No one raises their head. No one flinches. The tempo simply shifts. Footsteps over pavement answer the hum of the sedan. The city counts those steps, though no one watching realizes. Records, as it always does. 2, 3, 4 strides. A crisp rhythm. Shoulders cut through air, heavy with the smell of metal and rain. Float to the end veers toward the left mirror. Float 2 crosses behind. A couple that has just turned to watch a taxi that is not there. The stage draws its line in perfect geometry. In that line are years of practice that were never written down. The door to the steakhouse swings wider, as if sensing the moment. The flash of warmth pours across the brass, painting every face with gold. For a shimmer of a breath, the world looks merciful. Then it folds back to grey. Outside sound becomes shorthand. Tires sigh. A shoe scrape. The ring of something small hitting the ground and rolling toward the gutter. The script contains no dialogue, only motion. The passerby step back, too polite to interrupt, too unsure to claim fear. They are extras, wisely pretending not to know the plot. The doorman feels the air change temperature and understands more than the eye allows. He opens his mouth to say something that will never finish. His voice joins the fog. Southface crosses his arms to look like a man taking in the evening. Mailbox studies the ground, seeing nothing. Newsstand adjusts the radio dial, the music swelling and fading. Northface has already blended with the wall. Their training is the art of disappearing a heartbeat early. The sedan's engine grows louder for a second, the sound of a system still faithful to its duties. Then it idles again, confused by the absence of instruction. The driver's hand stays where it was, a steadying instinct in a storm you cannot see. Inside the restaurant, a fork clatters on a tablecloth, and someone laughs to cover the sound. The captain moves to the window and draws the curtain halfway. Human courtesy without awareness of what dignity it saves. Warmth meets glass, stops there, and cannot cross. Float 2 and Float 2 complete their pacing without looking back. They merge with the slim river of pedestrians, hats lowering, coats closing. The city swallows them the way it swallows all its careful trades. A bus moves, the signal changes, and the block releases its held breath. Steam rises again from a grate near the curb. The air refills itself with the comfort of noise. Passing traffic resumes its chatter. The stage becomes a street again. The mystery of seconds dissolves into routine. The ledger's page has been written and turned. Nothing falls, nothing lingers. The name that carried so much furniture no longer occupies the room. The crew that set the scene takes down its pieces without a word. They walk, not fast, not slow, as the fog loops back to clean what memory has not yet set. In a few hours someone will scrub the brass handle, sweep the salt, scatter new gravel along the walk. People will arrive for lunch, wondering why the curb has a darker patch, and why the traffic still hesitates at the light. The notebook of the city will close cleanly, but those of us who watched will know. The street was a stage once, and the play ended the way all good city plays end, with applause disguised as silence. The street would soon belong to headlines and to the rise of John Gotti, though the curb kept it silent. Chapter 10. Morning does not argue with the night that came before. It opens the blinds and lets the city decide what to remember. On East 46th Street, the brass is polished, the salt is fresh, and the window glow returns to its gentle sales pitch. The curb, darker by a shade you would miss if you were late for work, keeps its own counsel. Morning on East 46th Street returned the shine to the brass at Sparks. Silver checks its reflections. Linen breathes a faint starch. A busser hums a tune without words. The captain walks the line of tables and counts chairs with the quiet attention of a man running a small border crossing. People will come with stories. He will stamp those stories onto plates and let them exit as steam. Outside, the sidewalk plays host to the day after. Vans unload produce. A bike messenger aims for the cleanest seam between cabs. A woman with a paper cup carries two conversations at once, one on her phone, one in her head. The doorman takes a breath and lets it out in a long ribbon that disappears faster than it should. He rubs the rail and decides not to think about last night the way a sailor decides not to think about the exact swell that lifted a ship. You cannot live at that pitch. Newsstand has a fresh stack of papers, each shouting a headline that tries to make sense of seconds by using a week's worth of nouns. He sells 5 in a row to people who will fold them twice and read them on a train where the windows show tunnels instead of sky. He keeps the radio low and prefers weather to commentary. Weather never claims wisdom. It offers a forecast and forgives itself when it is wrong. Mailbox arrives later than usual and stands with hands in pockets, a man who slept poorly and will not admit why. He buys a stamp he will actually use and writes a short card to no one important. He describes the light on the avenue as thin and the coffee as fine. He adds a sentence that says the block was busy last night, then crosses it out. He puts the card in the slot. He likes that the city still accepts paper. North Face does not take the wall. He walks through once and keeps going. He stops 2 blocks away for soup and drinks half of it standing up. He drops a bill in the jar and leaves a note under the jar for himself. The note says breathe. He laughs at his own lesson and breathes anyway. A man cannot hold a wall forever. South Face stands with the scarf seller and makes a joke about the cold. He buys a scarf he does not need, just to give the day the appearance of normal trade. He ties it badly and pretends not to notice. The seller corrects the knot with 2 quick fatherly motions. They nod at each other like neighbours who have survived a storm that did not have the courtesy to announce itself as why. Flow 2 and Float 2 do their best work now by not returning. They do not look back. Their absence is part of the design, proof that a city can fold a stage into a sidewalk as fast as a street sweeper can erase a chalk arrow. Somewhere in the city they are crossing other streets with the same care, wearing patience as if it were wool. Inside, the waiter with the lamp polishes the shade and finds a tiny mark he missed last night. He rubs it away and feels a private relief not worth reporting. He resets a knife by the width of a fingernail and lets that be a prayer, not for anyone in particular, but for the craft itself. The room will be full again. It deserves to be. A warm room in winter is a public service. The driver sits in a different car today and checks a different set of mirrors. He adjusts the seat and feels an ache in his shoulders that belongs to a younger man who made a series of exact choices in a short span of time. He rolls his neck and decides to take the longer way to his first fare. Long ways are a cure the city invented for people who know the short ones by heart. In a church a few blocks away, a priest lights 2 candles and says the names of strangers softly to the air. He does not need a list. The neighborhood keeps the list for him. He asks for mercy in the general way that fits 1,000 cases. He opens the door and lets the cold in as if it were another member of the parish. He likes to think winter prays without words. The captain signs for a delivery and thanks the man who wheeled the boxes inside. The man nods and asks if the block is always this busy in December. The captain says yes and no, which is the city answer when accuracy and kindness want the same space. The delivery man laughs and leaves. The door breathes, warm out and cold in. A woman pauses at the window and raises her phone to catch the light. The photo will be a collection of gold shapes and soft reflections, a memory of a lunch she will not have time for this week. She will send it to someone who lives 2 time zones west and say this is the place. The person will promise to try it someday and mean it. The city survives on promises that end with someday. Newsstand sells a sports page to a boy who likes box scores more than stories. The boy wants numbers that prove a night was good or bad. He does not care about tone. He cares about columns that add up. He folds the paper and tucks it under his arm like a secret he will not keep. Numbers comfort certain minds. Stories comfort others. The block offers both and argues for neither. The doorman studies the curb as if it were an old photograph that has faded in corner. He knows where to look and where not to. He watches a taxi pull up, then pull away. A dance he has seen 1,000 times that still holds a little music when performed with respect. He gives the driver a nod and receives one back. Small fraternities keep the city civil. Inside, the room becomes itself again. The hum returns, the pace returns, the comfort returns. Men and women order the usual with the confidence of people who believe the usual is a form of grace. The staff moves in the learned script that looks like improvisation to anyone who does not know the marks on the floor. The marks exist. They are not painted. They live in feet and hands. By late afternoon, the light lowers to that blue shade that forgives mistakes. The street forgives too. The bus that was early is late. The cones that were straight are crooked. The puddle under the shelter is gone, replaced by a new wine nearer the hydrant. The block edits itself with the care of a barber who knows which curl to leave and which to take. A man in a long coat stops and reads the plaque on the wall that names a year. He reads the year twice, then once more, and then moves on. He thinks he has learned something. He has learned that brass holds memory better than skin. That is close enough for a Tuesday. At dusk, the city performs a small ceremony of forgetting, not erasure, adjustment. It keeps what it can use, sets aside what would slow the walk, and files the rest under stories to be told later, in rooms that like to be warm. The good rooms do not brag about what they held. They light their lamps and open at 5. I stand across the avenue and watch the door breathe. The line between warm windows and cold sidewalk is thinner than it was last night, and thicker at the same time. That is the trick of aftermath. It makes memory feel like weather. You put on what fits, and you leave the rest on the hook. The name that weighed the block has moved into other conversations, other tables, other ledgers. The street will host new arrivals and new departures. The crew that prefers sidewalks will find other corners. The driver will count other distances. The doorman will open 1,000 more doors, and each will be a promise kept to someone who believes in tables and heat, and a certain style of welcome. I do village last count and put the card away. Steps from corner to rail, seconds of walk light, the angle of a hood to the shine of brass. The numbers mean less now and more than ever. They are not magic. They are not fate. They are the way we share a city without stepping on each other's shoes. Night will come back, of course. It always does. It will bring steam and neon and a schedule that behaves until it does not. When it does not, people will do what they always do. They will prepare, adjust, and trust their hands to finish what their mouths wisely leave unsaid. The curb will host, the room will glow, the door will hinge between patience and decision. Somewhere a ledger will open to a fresh page. The pencil will scratch. People spoke of the Gambino family in past and future tense on the same day. Midtown accepted both.